Precocious began to read and read and read. Luckily, information was written in a way clearly enough so she could understand. She read of courageous people, and most of all, the man in which was spoken of with such great enthusiasm. The story did in fact state that the man had been jailed in the same way, in the same prison as so many people she had seen her go into in her lifetime. But the man had in fact broken out. The wagers had come for him, and he gone before Mr. Dethick and was found guilty. He was ordered to pay off a full debt, and so off the man went to prison. But before the man had been in prison, he told his friends that the prison would not be able to keep him locked in. He also told his friends beforehand that he would in fact be in prison and they should not fear. He told them that if they did not fear, the prison would not hold them either. And when the man went before Mr. Dethick, he told this to the men as well. And Mr. Dethick was the same as always, arrogant and overconfident. And he demanded that the man be treated the same as everyone else, even though the man had broken no laws at all. The man was perfect. The man did not argue. Even though he was completely innocent, he agreed willing to pay off a debt that was truly not his. 3 days after the man was imprisoned, he broke out, and he appeared to his friends and many people in the city. And when he did this, even Mr. Dethick and his wagers could not dispute this. After some time, the man left the city, this time not by force or imprisonment, but to a place reserved for him. He commanded his friends to not fear Mr. Dethick, the wagers, or the prison. He told them that he had already conquered this prison, and that no one who believed in him would remain in this prison. He wouldn't allow it. Before he left, he kept stressing that they should not fear, and that they should be courageous, just as he had been. And that's not all the man said. He said he would return one day and destroy Mr. Dethick and his wagers once and for all. Precocious could not believe what she had read. Mr. Dethick and his wagers defeated and destroyed? This is probably the reason why Mr. Dethick didn't want anyone learning about this. It was a prophecy of his complete destruction. Not only that, his whole kingdom reign would be crushed, and his wagers as well. The prison jailhouse was not a stronghold that Mr. Dethick made it out to be. Oh, how Precocious believed. The more she read and read, the more she believed, the more she was convinced. That very night she put faith in this man and all he spoke. She put faith in him that he would return one day and do what he said and completely destroy Mr. Dethick and his power. She imagined a man dressed in a knight's armor appearing, coming into the city and completely opening the prison up. And all the people that had been sent there freed. Mr. Dethick would get so upset, he'd come out and just as he come to the auditorium that day, hoping to put an end to the revolt and jail all those involved. The look on his face he'd get when he saw it was the man and an army with the man. But unlike the army with the man at the auditorium, the wagers would be the ones whose weapons and swords were retrieved. Mr. Dethick would see his old enemy face to face, and he knew it was time. They would engage in a battle. Mr. Dethick would demand payment once and for all from all the remaining inhabitants in the city, ordering his wagers to arrest all those left in the city. But this man would say, "Enough, and I am here to remove your authority in the city once and for all, you and all your wagers, and relieve you of your duties, and you will be defeated this day. There will be no more imprisonment for anyone else, forever." All the people in the city would shout for joy. Finally, a savior would come. But Mr. Dethick would not give in that easily. He would be arrogant and demand the battle, and he and the men would engage in a final battle. But Mr. Dethick's power would not prevail. It was written. His power would prove false and useless against the man, as written. And once he battled Mr. Dethick and put an end to him and his wagers, Precocious would fall at his feet because she had believed in him, and she just knew he'd come and he'd do what he said he would. Precocious realized she was daydreaming again. Once again, she opened her eyes to find herself on her rug, still hugging the papers on the floor. But she didn't care. She knew one day this fantasy would come true. She smiled to herself and was filled with joy after a crazy day. Faith in this man. Precocious put the papers away this time in a better hiding place, and off to bed she went. Chapter 9. That night, Mr. Dethick was awakened around midnight to a wager banging on the front door of his home. Boom, 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 boom. What is it? He knew it must be important. No one would come to his house this time of night. Master, there's a problem. An Apatan has appeared. Mr. Dethick thought he'd have a heart attack. It couldn't be, he thought to himself. It has been hundreds of centuries since the last Opatan appeared. This could only mean one thing. His enemy, whom he felt nothing but hatred for, had made a strong connection with someone upon the earth. Opatans only appeared in the sky when someone on earth put faith in his archenemy. This meant that someone had found out about his archenemy and put trust in him. This also meant that his enemy had noticed it and would further more strengthen the person, whomever he or she was. A new star called an Apatan. Bright stars that appeared in the sky to prove a symbol or some sort between the person who put faith and the man who had indeed broken out of the prison so many centuries before. This also meant that the person could possibly be the next one to break out. Opatans only appeared when there was a strong conviction of belief in the man from someone on earth. But Mr. Dethick knew exactly who it was responsible for this. The man from the auditorium event. But even this man did not make an Opatan appear because of his faith. Mr. Dethick knew because he had his wagers checked. No Opatan had appeared, so he wondered to himself who was responsible for this. If the man from the auditorium and his henchmen did not have enough faith to make one appear, then who did? It could only mean one thing. Someone from that place had read the literature and in fact hidden it. Maybe even a group of people. Mr. Dethick now cursed himself, wishing he never let anyone from the auditorium go free. Now he could have a revolt, and this time he'd have to deal with more than just a few rebels. His enemy, this man from so long ago, was no doubt letting Mr. Dethick know. He noticed the person or persons and would help them. Mr. Dethick was determined to not let that happen. He would find the person or persons and put their lights out. And if or when the man showed up, this time he'd throw him in prison for good. There was no way Mr. Dethick was giving up his kingdom he'd worked so hard to build. No, he would crush whomever it was for good. Can you find out who it is? Mr. Dethick answered the wager in front of him. Can you find out who it is? The coordinates are being evaluated as we speak, the wager said nervously. Good. As soon as you find out, let me know, okay? I may be able to put an end to this before it even begins, Mr. Dethick said sternly. I'll be in my office. Immediately, I must dress. Meet me in an hour. Mr. Dethick added. Yes, sir, the wager responded.